This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Sirena Huang didn't come from a musical family, but when she was introduced to the violin, she was instantly hooked. This Connecticut native has gone from viral TED Talk star at age 11 to a world-renowned concert violinist in her 30s. Today, we'll hear about her life, her activism, and her music. I started by asking her about her first memories of music. So, I just want to start off by asking, what are some of your earliest memories of music?
So I started violin when I was 4 years old, and I started with the Suzuki method at the University of Hartford. At the Hart School of Music, they have the community division.
Mm-hmm.
And
what's the Suzuki method?
Well, Suzuki method. Suzuki started this program basically to let music be more accessible. And the way that he taught music was that he trained students to hear before they could read music. Mm. So it was focused on training the ear. And something that I love about his philosophy was that it's more important to be a good citizen than to be a good musician. And I was so lucky to grow up in that kind of community where it was a very nurturing and supportive and encouraging community. And actually, it made it so easy for me to fall in love with music. And I remember even at school, during the weekdays, I would always look forward to the Saturdays because that's when we had all the classes at Hart. And I was always looking forward to it because I genuinely just loved it. I wasn't as concerned about, can I be, really good at playing the violin? It was more just like I thought it was really fun and it was enjoyable. And also my first violin teacher, who I now call my violin mom, Linda Fiore, she made it so easy for me to fall in love with music. And so my first memories of music is actually just a lot of joy. And I actually have a very specific memory, which was, so I first started out, they teach you, like posture, how to hold a violin and things like that. And then they give you like a cardboard thing, like it's not an actual instrument. There's no sound that comes out of it. And eventually I had, quote, graduated from that. And so I could finally order an actual instrument. And so I remember coming home from school, getting out of the school bus, walking home, and my mom would yell from the front door, and she's like, "Hey, your violin arrived." And I literally threw my backpack on the sidewalk and I ran in, like I booked it. And so that I could go home and try this instrument that I get to call mine, But it was really I really enjoyed, and I think music spoke to me in a way that other forms of art didn't. So I felt a special connection with it. And I think I'm forever grateful for the Suzuki community because it showed me how important it was to love music. And that's something that I prioritize no matter how busy I am. I think my life has changed, of course, a lot over the years. But I always find that a very important value to keep no matter what I do.
Well, and I love that joy. I think oftentimes when we hear stories about learning music, sometimes it's very disciplined, right? There's a seriousness to it. There's a structure to it, which exists.
Is also very important. Yeah.
So how do you maintain that joy?
I think, it's easy to say like, you just love music and it's all going to be fine, Right. And of course, there's always a lot of times where I feel like I am trying to re-find that joy. And so it's not a necessarily easy road in that sense. But I think whenever I sort of want to be refreshed with that, I always go back into the music. Because I think things that sometimes rob me from the joy of music is things that are outside of music. So maybe distractions or stresses or the competitive of classical music. Or, there's just so many things that could make me feel like, oh, this is a very stressful thing to do. Right. But when it comes to just purely music and trying to go back to that initial intent of the initial excitement I have for the music, that's what kind of reminds me, like, this is why I do it.
Right. The running of the going from the school bus, crossing barriers. And
Right.
It's so funny when you're saying that. I kind of have an equivalent where I'm a huge reader, and that was it's still a joyful thing for me to do, and it was something that was really encouraged by my parents. And I have memories too. Actually, this is so nerdy, but it's like I would come home and same thing, like run back home, and that half finished book, it's like it's waiting for me. So,
yeah.
So I have to ask too, why the violin?
I always felt like the violin was the instrument that was closest to my voice. I don't have a great voice. Like you don't want to hear me sing, but to me, violin was the best way for me to express myself more so than any other instrument. And so I think that just spoke to me at a young age. At first, how I ended up with the violin is actually sort of coincidental. My older sister played the piano. She also started at Hart School. And I was like 3 or 4 years old at the time. I would go into lessons with her. And then my mom, who was also in the lesson, realized that I was strangely interested whenever, like during the lesson for a 3-year-old, feels different.
I love the strangely interested.
Yeah, it's like a little strange, a little weird. And so my mom thought that, okay, maybe I should play something. And they said, well, I was like super petite. And they're like, well, the violins, they have smaller sizes. So maybe you start with that. So I kind of just landed with that instrument. And I started, by the way, on a 1/16 size. So it's like a really toy size.
Which I encourage listeners to Google it.
Yeah.
And it's so cute.
It's really, really cute. Like now when I look at it, it's like a tiny little, like, I don't know, Christmas tree ornament,
That is so small.
Yeah, it's really small. But anyway, so I sort of just landed with it. But honestly, it felt like a part of me early on because I felt like it did emulate sort of like my voice and how I want to express things.
Well, I want to just fast forward a little bit to the present because it's obvious. Of course, it's such a huge part of your lives, and you have gone through so many performances and stages and whatnots, and so because you often perform as a soloist. I'm curious to hear what's the most interesting thing about performing in an orchestra versus in a section. Let's say, are those experiences that you imagined when you had that quote quote toy violin?
Well, I think something that I love is that as a musician, there are lots of different forms of performing. You could play with an orchestra, you could play in an orchestra. There's chamber music, there's solo recitals, and there's all sorts of instrumentations that you could be playing with. And so I find joy in all sorts of settings, really. Playing with an orchestra, of course, it's really up there for me. There's something so... it's a very humbling experience and also such a gratifying experience when you're playing with like 100 musicians behind you who are all, in the same mentality to serve the music. And a lot of times I've had so many experiences where I'm up on stage playing with orchestra and I get goosebumps because it just feels like so surreal that we're all making music together and sharing that in a space with people that want to be there and listen. So I think all sorts of forms have different challenges and also different things that are gratifying about it. Another thing that I love about playing with orchestra is that it oftentimes feels like you're playing chamber music with them. I don't think playing a concerto is about, I don't know, like the soloist in the front and then the orchestra's in the back. It's really about a collaborative experience. And that brings me a lot of joy for sure.
Well, and I remember learning really just how much, that's a lot of people to get together in one place and play a piece of music. And it's really powerful, I think, whenever I'm able to go see a performance, and definitely want to dig more into experiences with that. But you just mentioned there's so many different kinds of performances. Have to talk about, you had a TED Talk pretty early on in your career. How did that come about?
Oh, so I was 11 at the time. And a few years before that, I had just started taking lessons and classes at Juilliard Pre-College program. And that was every Saturday. And my dad was such a trooper, would drive me to New York every Saturday. And that's a 5-hour round trip.
Wow, Dad.
I know. It's just amazing.
Shout out to Dad.
I really would not be here without my parents' support. I mean, really, it is a huge commitment. Anyway, so I started taking classes at Juilliard Pre-College, and I was studying with the dean at the time, Stephen Clapp, and a lady had called him who was running a philanthropic event, and she said that she wanted a young violinist to play at this event, so he had suggested me. So long story short, I play in this event, and I meet Chris Anderson, who was the founder of TED Talk. And so after he heard me play, he was like, it'd be really cool if you came and performed here. At the time, I had no idea what TED Talk was. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was like 10 years old.
Right.
I was just like, okay, so I should go play. And then since there's a word talk in there, I should probably talk.
Like, very good deduction.
Thank you. And eventually, I was like, my dad and I were trying to think about like, what the heck do I talk about? And we realized that TED stood for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. So I was trying to think about like how the violin relates to these 3 points and, just things like that. It was my first time giving any sort of public speaking experience. And so it was, I remember just stepping on stage, and I think there were like 2,000 people there. And it was like, I think I didn't process it at all on stage because it was like so surprising what the situation was. So I just I played. I didn't think about like how many people were there. And honestly, the audiences were super friendly. They were, clapping and laughing at jokes that I didn't really think was that funny. Right. But, so they made it easy for me as well. But I had no idea that performance would garner so many views afterwards. So that was, it was cool.
So you can literally say thanks for coming to my TED Talk without the irony.
I guess so.
Well, it's amazing because that's the TED Talk is a different kind of stage, and then you've had local stages, national stages, and this is more than a 5-hour traveling time. But you also recently performed a tour overseas, going to Taiwan, and as a Taiwanese American, what was that like for you?
I think when I perform in Taiwan, it's always really, really meaningful because all of my relatives are there. So it's only my immediate family here in the States. So my grandparents, my aunt and uncles, my cousins, everybody is there. So when I have a chance to share music with them, it really, it feels very, very special. And whenever I go back, I also give classes and I teach students there. And so somehow to be able to give back to this culture and community and sort of a home to me, it's just really, really special to me. Yeah.
Is the audience different, or does it feel different when you're performing there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the audience is very different. And I think this is more or less true for a lot of Asian cultures, is that when I perform in Asia, I realize that there are a lot of students that go to these concerts. And I think primarily because learning an instrument is probably much more popular in Asian culture. So there are a lot of younger students, middle school, high school, college. And so I would say the age range is noticeably different for me. And I think it's very common to talk about, classical music amongst younger generations. And another funny thing, and I guess it's also fun, is that after a concert, they always have these like autograph signings, and there's and you get to meet the audiences, and so they set up a table for you, and there's like a line of people that want to talk to you and stuff. But I think the first thing that I noticed when I perform in Taiwan is, of course, the age difference, because here in the United States, it's different, and the people that go to these concerts are older, and so it's interesting because it shows the different cultural values and how the kids are brought up between cultures in Asia versus in the Western cultures.
And that sort of the perfect transition to talk about accessibility, because that seems like that's different enough for me to think, as we're having a conversation right now, that even as an audience, I'm seeing what you're seeing on stage while I'm off stage, right? It seems like the audience there is a difference here, and it sounds like perhaps the younger generations there have an earlier exposure to classical music. So maybe if you're interested, they will continue in whatever way, whether they want to perform or maybe it's just a part of their lives, or maybe they want to teach. So what do you think needs to be done to make classical music more inclusive? Because I think intimidation may be a part of it, because it seems to be a very intimidating thing to get into.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll start out by saying that I think art has the potential of a very powerful potential of connectivity, of connecting with people. However, I think that potential cannot be reached until we reckon with the oppressive and racist history of classical music. And when we think about, even when you're talking about the experience of going to classical music concerts now, and which has always been the case, we are in this really formal setting. We all have to, we're sitting down, our bodies are being regulated. We can't clap, we can't dance, we can't sing. And so in a way, classical music has sort of fallen into this oppressive state where it sends off a message about who can go and who this music is for. And I think that is a reason why sometimes we feel like music is not that accessible, because concerts are kind of giving off messages that it's not a part of daily life in a way. And of course, accessibility shows up in so many other ways too, in education. I also think that there can be more different models of concert events, such as mutual aid events, or pay what you can tickets, and donation-based events and things like that, because a lot of times tickets are very expensive, and their tickets are geared towards specific audience groups. And so there are a lot of things that kind of end up resulting in a more inaccessible kind of culture for classical music.
Well, and because you mentioned two things, it's pretty expensive to go to these performances for the most part, and you also mentioned education earlier, and because classical music is notoriously challenging to break into. So, do you think it's part of how to make classical music more accessible is giving everyone a chance to have that education? Absolutely.
And giving everybody a chance starts in so many forms. When we think about, what kind of music do we play? Who are the composers that we play? Who gets to perform on stage? Who takes up space? And because representation matters. When someone who is not a musician, you go on YouTube and you look up videos of classical music, who are these people? And so that is, it starts in so many different avenues, about this topic.
Yeah, and then talk about looking up music on YouTube or however you get your music. Are you seeing more musicians, perhaps younger or whatnots, that are becoming more popular and starting to sort of maybe change the way classical music looks like?
Sure, absolutely. There are a lot of, there are lots of musicians, I think, now doing amazing work. For example, we talk about two-set violins, although I think they're not really continuing two-set anymore specifically. But what two-set did was that they made classical music much more accessible in a very humorous and relatable way. And there's also a lot of composers like Jesse Montgomery and composer Shano Pebolo, who are really challenging kind of the oppressive history of classical music and really finding a new way of imagining a new classical music world. And also, I think about just recently, Karen Slack and Michelle Can, who just got the Grammys for an album featuring all of Florence Price's music. I mean, that kind of stuff brings me so much joy. It's just amazing. And that is the recognition that they so deserve, of course. And it's, it brings me joy because that is sort of the direction that we want to take. I think in order for music to reach its full potential, we have to sort of redefine what classical music is, and we have to look at it through an anti-oppressive and liberatory lens. And so that really starts by asking ourselves the question of what classical music is, and detailed questions like what we play, who plays it, what is this music for, what is the classical venue, concert halls looking like, where's the location, things like that are places to start.
My guest today is Sirena Huang. She's a Connecticut native and concert violinist. She'll be playing with the Hartford Symphony Orchestra this weekend, and she'll stay with us after the break. And just a note for our listeners, the Hartford Symphony Orchestra is an active Connecticut public sponsor. Coming up, we hear more about her work at the intersection of art and activism. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Where We Live. I'm Catherine Shen. Stay with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Violinist Sirena Huang understands why classical music can be a little intimidating, but some artists are working to make it more accessible. I asked her about some of the ways that's being done, including classical covers of pop songs. I think oftentimes we talk a little bit about intimidation earlier is because the classical music is not songs that are played on the top 40 radio if you're listening to the radio or if it's on a Spotify popular playlist. And I think there's been a lot of artists, as I've seen over the years, they'll do covers, like classical music versions of whatever the latest popular music is. And I'm wondering, is that something that can help, let's say a younger person, they'll hear an instrumental version of a popular song, and maybe, because I'm thinking about it from an instrument standpoint too, to get younger people, or not just younger people, just anyone to be inspired to pick up something. What do you think?
That's a really great point. I think part of what I was saying about classical music having an oppressive history is that there's a very, very narrow definition of what is considered, quote, good classical music. And so, people that do covers in a classical style. In the classical music world, I hate to say it, but it's like people don't encourage that because it's like, okay, you can only play, I don't know, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart for you to be considered, quote, legit,
Right.
So there's a very narrow definition of that. And that's a result of classical music has just been built off of a lot of problems when it comes to white supremacy and also, just a more oppressive nature in that sense. So, it becomes, so you have a very strict criteria of what is considered legit. And, but what you're saying is absolutely right, is that if you want to have, if you want to focus and grow and change this accessibility of classical music, we have to rethink what classical music means and who the audience for, and also who defines what good classical music is, right? And historically, it's always been defined by white European-centric people. So, that's definitely a start and a very important question to ask ourselves.
Well, I get really excited whenever I come across a random YouTube video and I click on it. This really cool person maybe playing the violin. It's usually a violin and playing a really cool rendition of whatever the popular song is. And it makes me want to pick up a violin.
Exactly. And even, also like when orchestra, sometimes they do like live film score productions. That's also, I know a lot of my friends who are not classical musicians, but they go to that and then they're very interested in orchestral works and they want to hear other works. And not to say that is necessarily like, film score is like a gateway or something to lure in people or anything. But it's just that, we have to be a little bit more open-minded about what classical music really is and how to reach more people.
Right. And I think, and another thing I believe is a huge part of your work too is musical activism.
Mm-hmm,
can you tell me about how that plays a role in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I will backtrack a little bit and share a little bit about my personal experience growing up in classical music world. So I'll be honest, when I was younger, I was very ignorant and I didn't see anything wrong with the exclusivity of classical music. But what that really meant was that I felt while there was nothing wrong with the classical music world, there were things wrong with me being Asian in a European-centric world. And, I have been told to not play Asian composers' works because they're, quote, not serious enough. If I want to be taken seriously, then I need to play, the standard repertoire and, or even certain pieces that I shouldn't play because I'm Asian and that I wouldn't be able to quite understand the European style. So, the list honestly goes on. And I kind of grew up wishing that I could swap my face out for a white European face so that I would stop getting these kind of comments. And it wasn't until as I was older that I realized that white supremacist values really do run the classical music world, and it has affected me deeply. And I'm just one of countless examples of how marginalized people are affected by racism in classical music. So, it is now one of my lifelong missions to make classical music or to inspire a more radical and just classical music world. And again, it really has to come from looking at it through an anti-oppressive and liberatory lens. And it's hard. It's not something that, you can just say, okay, here's the answer. We can do it overnight. And it shouldn't be. If someone says that, I think there's a problem there because we're talking about centuries of violent oppressive history. So, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time to reconstruct and redefine and rethink about what we're trying to build for our future. But, this is, I say all of this out of a deep care for this industry. This is a world that I grew up in and I see myself in for the so many decades in my life. And I really think that there's so much potential in what classical music can do, but we have to first reckon with the horrible history that it has.
Well, and as you're unpacking the history and still also looking forward to the potential of what this industry can do, that's a lot of burden for someone to carry. And I think representation in one sense is you're literally physically different. You're on stage. So that's a kind of representation in of itself. So perhaps somebody in the audience will see, oh, if she can do it, maybe I can do it too. But that's very it's intangible. It's so nebulous, right?
Yeah.
But hopefully it's happening.
Yeah, right.
What else can you do? Like what else is in your sort of repertoire now in that space that you feel like you as a musician, you as a citizen, as a human being, what can you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So now, especially when I'm doing recitals, when I have the freedom to choose what kind of pieces I perform, I'm always very conscious about which composers take up space in my program. And I think that is a beautiful way of centering around marginalized voices, to pick pieces that have historically been oppressed. For example, actually, I have my concert at Carnegie Hall is coming up in April. And I have works featuring Coleridge Taylor Perkinson, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, Chen Gong. I try to have much more diversity in my program because these are voices that have been oppressed, but they are absolutely incredible works that I really want more people to know, and I want to center my focus on them. And so I think programming is something that we can all do as musicians. And also, finding ways where we can have musical events where it's community based and it's more about collective action. And so I mentioned earlier about mutual aid models. I think that as, when we're really here helping each other rather than in hierarchy or a top-down kind of institution, then I think we're starting to convey a different message for what classical music is.
Well, and I think another big thing for you last year too is speaking out in support of Gaza. Speaking of the activism space, how did you decide to do that, to voice your feelings about the conflict?
Well, I guess to me, it's how could I not? Growing up as a marginalized person in the United States, I recognize systems of oppression and racism and colonization, and it's impossible for me to not speak up about what's happening to Palestinians and the ethnic cleansing and the injustice. And I speak about Gaza because I feel like this is a fight about collective humanity and collective liberation, and because nobody is free until we're all free. And I particularly find it important to talk about it in the classical music world because, unfortunately, the classical music world has been complicit in the face of injustice. It has a history of that. So I feel that it's very, very important to talk about it in a field that is sort of quiet about it. Yeah.
So we've had conversations with musicians where they play music as a form of protest and also as a different kind of platform where different kinds of voices expressing their feelings or what they're thinking at the time.
Absolutely.
How do you see the role of artists in activism? And was activism something that you ever thought you were going to do?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think about that a lot. And I always go back to this quote by Toni Morrison, and she says, if I'm quoting correctly, all good art is political. And those that try not to be political are political by saying they love the status quo. So I think it's, there's, when you see that there is so much injustice around the world, art is sort of the way to inspire change. And because in the art world, there is already so much that needs to be reconstructed. And so I think it's very important that art is part of the wave of activism. And it is a form of activism that can reach and can make changes in ways that maybe other forms cannot.
Well, we're talking about art playing a role in change, but what about the role of healing? What are your thoughts about using art as a way to sort of heal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, I think one of the greatest potential of what art is that it can connect people. I don't necessarily think that, music is universal because everyone has their own unique experience. But I do think that music can be have a very powerful way to connect others and to inspire justice and inspire people to, like what you're saying, to for resistance. And also it can inspire people to move and to dance and to feel joy. I mean, this is a way to connect people. And so I think this is, for me, the ideal of what art can be. But again, if this cannot happen, you can't just say, let's do it. Right. You have to go back and you have to reckon with the history that we're working with here. Yeah.
Well, and then you talking about wanting people to sing and dance and vibe, right, with the music. Yeah. And I want to talk about, because you're going to be playing at the Hartford Symphony Orchestra pretty soon here. But when you're on the stage, you're performing, and you're looking at the audiences, what do you hope they're taking from this? What do you hope they're hearing? Because I think sometimes, perhaps if you're not familiar with the classical music space, maybe you go in and you don't know what to listen for, or can you just sit there and just enjoy?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, because I think everyone's experience listening to the same piece will be very different. And this piece particularly, I've gotten all sorts of responses for this kind of for Sibelius Violin Concerto. But Sibelius's writing style is very vast. I mean, it's very it's grand. It's also very dark. It's emotionally, there's such a huge emotional range. And so I hope that, audiences that listen are able to feel something when they hear the music. I can't say what exactly, because I really do think everybody's experience is different. But as a performer, I try to serve the music the best I can in a way that I think represents my interpretation of what Sibelius intends to do. And there's something, something very beautiful about all of us trying to, all of us on stage trying to serve this music with this one intended goal, and to share that with the audience. So I hope that this is an emotional experience for the audience, and to listen for the way Sibelius writes. It's very it's sometimes very visual, and it expresses certain emotions in ways that probably words cannot. So maybe that's sort of a vague answer, but I'm excited. I will say this is one of my favorite pieces, and I hope that people will be able to connect with it, or be able to have some sort of response to it when they hear it.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's vague, because I think you're right. Everyone's experiences is so different. You're going to see different things, and we can read the same book and have a completely different experience.
Exactly.
And so you're going to be performing different pieces, including Sibelius, at the Hartford Symphony Orchestra this weekend. This is, of course, not the first time you're playing in your home state. Does that experience change when you come back? Are you a different musician every time you come back and perform, or is the sense of familiarity familiar to you?
I think a little bit of both. Hartford Symphony is a very special orchestra to me. Actually, one of my first ever live concerts that I attended as an audience was Hartford Symphony. I think I probably was like 7 years old or something like that. And so, the orchestra has been a huge part of, being an inspiration for me to become a musician, really. And so every time I come back, it feels like home in a lot of ways, but also it's very true that every time I come back, I do feel different. I think I approach music differently, and I have perhaps a different perspective on why I play music. And so I think, on a smaller scale, when I revisit the same piece, I will interpret the pieces in different ways. But on a bigger scale, me performing can have I want to convey maybe different messages as what I did when I was just, 12 years old. Yeah.
Do you find moving, because you perform with so many orchestras, is it difficult to move from orchestra to orchestra?
I think there's always kind of a period of, that's why we have rehearsals. It's like a warm-up period where we're trying to be on the same wavelength, and that we try to understand each other and our different playing styles and things like that. So it can be challenging, but I don't mean that in a negative way. It's actually kind of a fun experience, just playing with different orchestras and finding different ways of communicating with each other through music. And so also working with different conductors too is another experience that can be very rewarding as well. So I think working with different musicians it's always different. I don't ever expect it to be the same, even if it's the same piece. But I find that part of the really beautiful process of it.
Well, and then as you continue the beautiful process, are there specific things that you're looking forward to in the future, things that you're working on, or areas that you hope to focus on?
In the future, again, I hope to continue to advocate for change in the classical music world and a more radical world here. And, it's a dream of mine, actually, to start, you could maybe call it an art series, a multimedia art series that centers on marginalized voices, and also challenges how we experience art in ways that maybe haven't been done before. So again, I know that's a very vague answer, but that's something that in the coming years I would like to develop, and it's something that my sister and I are we have a dream in making that into a reality.
And I just wanted to end by asking, we've been talking so much about music, classical music, what it can do, your process of learning it, and what you hope the audiences can get from it. But what kind of music do you usually listen to when you're sort of chillaxing?
I listen to all sorts of music. I don't think there's only one genre.
Yeah.
Recently I've been listening to a lot of jazz violinists. Stuff Smith is my, oh my gosh, all-time favorite. I mean, jazz. So Stuff Smith, Eddie South are two violinists that I admire so much. And their level of just creativity, imagination, and just genius ways of thinking music is just unparalleled. So anyway, so I love listening to jazz music, and I listen to pop. I listen to a lot of, I turn on the radio sometimes and I'm just listening, and a lot of times I listen just to I'm not even processing it much. It's just because I think I process so much in my mind when it comes to listening to classical music that sometimes I just listen to really chill lo-fi music,
Right. Big fan of lo-fi.
Yeah, exactly. So all sorts of stuff. But I think music can serve very different purposes for me at different times.
Totally. Yeah. And we've been talking about so much about music, and you're talking to a different kind of audience today. What do you hope they take out from this conversation?
Well, I hope that that we are able to collectively work towards a more liberatory future, and that can show up in so many different forms, and to center our efforts on marginalized voices, and to find different platforms and different ways of centering them, and finding ways to have a future in our classical music where it is anti-oppressive, it's anti-racist, and again, there's so many avenues that we can take, but we have to start asking ourselves questions, being able to reflect on our own roles, and finding different platforms where we can explore with that.
Thank you so much, Sirena, for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
That was Sirena Huang, concert violinist and Connecticut native. This weekend, she'll play with the Hartford Symphony Orchestra. And just a note to our listeners that the Hartford Symphony Orchestra is an active Connecticut public sponsor. Coming up, we hear from Music Haven, an inclusive music community in Connecticut. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Where We Live. I'm Catherine Shen. Stay with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Early exposure to music can be instrumental for future musicians. Every afternoon, Music Haven welcomes students from 25 different schools in New Haven. Young musicians have the opportunity to practice, perform, and receive mentorship from professional musicians. Joining us now is Linda Numagami. She's a resident musician of Music Haven and violist of the Haven String Quartet. Thank you so much, Linda, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And so before you worked at Music Haven, you actually received a community engagement grant when you attended Juilliard. Where does your passion for bringing music to the community and to everyone come from?
It's always been something very important to me. Just growing up, music was a safe place for me to go to. I think having those times to practice is a quiet time. You don't have a screen. Mm-hmm. You don't have other people's opinions. It is a special time for yourself. And so I think that music, we all know, has such a healing power. So I just wanted to share that with other people. I don't think money or opportunities should prevent anyone from having that experience.
Well, and I think we've been talking a lot about having a safe space to learn or just explore whatever the art you're choosing to do. And in this case, of course, we're talking about music. And the space at Music Haven has a lot of practice spaces and areas where kids can explore music and get lessons. But there's also places to do their homework or even just grab a snack or something. So it looks a little different from other music schools or the traditional musical spaces that I think we grew up knowing. Can you describe how things work at Music Haven?
Sure. So like you said, people can come and get snack. They can get homework help with a tutor. They can play Uno with their friends. We have lots of people that support the systems here. For example, I mentioned earlier, we have Margie who comes and she butters toast for students. She asks, do you want cheese? Do you want toast? And there are a lot of volunteers that come and help as well. Some of them are also musical volunteers. They might help tune a student's cello if they want to come and practice in a practice room. So there are a lot of people that help us, not only members of the quartet. So basically, we each teach a lot of one-on-one lessons every week. I have about 17 students myself. I have a studio class every Wednesday where students get to perform for each other. And I also teach a group class every Friday where they can play with other instruments as well. So all these opportunities allow them to learn how to listen to each other. They learn how to play complicated music and songs that they want to learn, are interested in. And having all these times that we meet are ways that we prepare for different performance opportunities in the community. So we have our students play at library concerts all throughout New Haven, and also on our Unitarian Society of New Haven. We have a concert series there, and we have our groups and ensembles play as well. So we try to give them as many opportunities as we can to both perform and learn.
Well, and while you're giving them opportunities, I kind of want to backtrack a little bit and talk about your own experience with this because now you are the person that's there inspiring or helping the students in whatever way you can. What was your own experience like that allowed you to sort of be inspired to be that person now in these kids' life?
Sure. So now I'm the violist of the Haven String Quartet. I just started about 6 months ago. I've been very lucky that I've had such lovely human beings as teachers. And my own teacher that I studied with for 6 years, both at the New England Conservatory and Juilliard, was Roger Tapping. He passed away about 2 years ago, but he was a professional violist in a quartet. And I was very inspired by his story and his life. And from learning from him, I realized that string quartet is a beautiful tool, a vehicle to serve your community. So I was inspired by him. And also, that I would say he was my main inspiration. Yeah. That's why when I did the community engagement grant a long time ago, it was chamber music going into places that didn't have a budget or anything like that. And that was what was important to me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's pretty amazing, I think, that a lot of kids now have that space to be a part of. And I think part of your philosophy, I think, is music is not just for music itself. There are skills that you yourself or the kids can use elsewhere. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, sure. So one of my students I have right now just got accepted to her college of choice, University of Georgia, and she's extremely excited. She wants to be a vet. And I think she's also a fantastic violist. And I think when I listen to her talk, I learn so much from her. And I think that's how I view my role as a teacher, not only to be giving information to my students, but also to be very actively listening to them. And oftentimes they tell me how they want to be taught rather than me dictating to them what to do.
That sounds like a plan. And I think sometimes we get intimidated, I wonder, when we hear the phrase classical music. Can you talk about what kind of exposure to classical music do your students typically have before attending Music Haven?
I imagine it would probably be different for every student. I know some of them, maybe their parents are church organists or choir teachers, and other people maybe don't have music in their public school. So we serve as sort of an in-between. We're able to give lessons to people that don't have that access in their school. So there's a huge range of exposure to classical music with our students.
And earlier we talked about how students can learn to communicate with each other or even just to have a safe space to explore music, whether or not it's something that they want to continue beyond the classroom, or if they do. Talking about the more broader direction is, how do you think music can be used as a tool of community building and connection?
That's an amazing question. So one way that I love to do that is by having the students play duets with each other. When you play a duet with someone, you have your part, and the other person has their part, either accompanying someone else or offering a counter melody. And I think this kind of active listening, you have to be prepared in your own individual part, and also you have to be able to listen to someone else and what they may be doing and respond to that. I think it's getting harder and harder to listen to each other. And I think having the dedication it takes to physically be able to play an instrument outside of yourself and intellectually understand it, physically, intellectually, and have an emotional intent to what we're doing musically, those are all incredible skills for great human beings.
Well, I love that so much because I feel like theoretically, I think we all know how it works. But in real time, as you're watching the duets or when you're talking with your students on how this works, do you see it working as it's happening, or do you see it working afterwards, or maybe a mix of the two?
Probably a mix of the two, but even just, can I use one example?
Sure, of course.
I have one student, we're working on sort of our self-talk as we practice. So if we're constantly telling ourselves, I'm going to miss that shift, or I'm going to fail, or, oh, that could have been better, and giving all this harsh judgment on ourselves as we're practicing, maybe the outcome is not going to be exactly what we want. So sort of using different techniques like smiling to yourself on the inside and telling yourself nice things as you're playing are all helpful tools that we can use. And I've now worked with this student for about 6 months, and I can genuinely see as they are playing, instead of judging themselves before they've even tried, they are telling themselves, I can do this. And I think they're bringing it to other parts of their life as well.
It's so interesting that you say that, because we've had other conversations where we're talking about how physically smiling or internally smiling really helps with the mood change, or if you need sort of a what's the word, like just to start over again when you hit like a rut, like in the moment, whether it's like a big rut or a small rut, like that's really helpful. So it's really interesting to hear that that's kind of across the board. And as you're talking about that, it's clear that there's so much passion here, and community is clearly so important to you. So with that in mind, when you're thinking about giving more accessibility to music for students and making classical music more inclusive, what comes to mind? What do you do to make that available to anyone who is interested?
Well, one of the things that I love about classical music is that it gives you tools to learn any kind of music that you're interested in. If you limit yourself to only learning by ear, then you're sort of limiting the kinds of music that you can play. And I think at its core, classical music is really interested in exploring music of many different groups or cultures. So I think that a lot of us, we can get stuck in sort of fundamental studies of music, but really the aim is so that we can explore other cultures, so that we can explore different kinds of music. So it's not always Suzuki.
Right.
And I love Suzuki, but that's not really the end goal.
So basically whatever inspires you in some way.
Whatever inspires you. I have my students in the studio class sometimes play jazz standards. We learn them together. I'm very open to different kinds of music, or you know that song, I Want to Be a Part of Your Symphony?
Yes.
So, we can learn different songs like that.
Yeah.
If they want to learn that song, I'm open to it. And I think studio class is a fun way to learn those kinds of other kinds of music. Studio class is a great chance for them to learn other kinds of music. But if you don't have that foundation or technical understanding, then you're just going to hit a wall. So
Right. So find a song that you love, turn it into a quote, quote, classical version, and then you'll go from there.
yeah.
That sounds like a good time to me. And, we've gone through so much about exposure and accessibility and having safe spaces to do this. So for our listeners who are listening in today, what do you hope they take out from this conversation?
I hope they feel inspired to play music, to sing, to stay encouraged, and to wish that other people have kindness and joy in their day-to-day lives.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your kindness and joy with us. You've been listening to Linda Numagami, who's a resident musician of Music Haven and violist of the Haven String Quartet. Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening.